Okay, so yeah, I just want to echo what Emma said. Thank you for joining us on the panel as male allies in female sport. Women's football wouldn't be what it is without men, so I'm really excited to have you part of the conversation. So can we start, just everybody tell us a bit about yourself, your current and previous roles, and who inspired you to get involved in your sports?
So yeah, I'm Steve. I'm the head coach at Fulham FC Women. I just a bit of an intro. I've been coaching for probably about 16 years now. I started with an under 10 girls team in my local town. Been on a bit of a journey through both women and men's football, and yeah, obviously come sort of full circle back to women's football, which has been great. I think for me the person who sort of got me into football most is probably my dad. Again, probably typical story. When I was young, I wanted to play football, and yeah, he was a big football fan, terrible footballer, but massive football fan, and got me playing at a really young age. And yeah, and I'm now still involved in the game, which is great.
Hi everyone, my name's Dan Clark. I'm currently the general manager of the netball franchise here called Surrey Storm, alongside the basketball franchise that also plays out of Surrey Sports Park. I'm a ex-professional basketball player, very recently, retired around 5 months ago. Was very lucky to have such a long career, played around 17 years, mainly abroad, mainly in Spain, luckily enough, which is quite a nice place to live. But yeah, I started playing basketball at a very young age, came from a very sporty family. My mum was a professional basketball player here in the UK. Can still remember watching her at a very young age playing in National Cup finals and things like that, and was probably the biggest inspiration I had. Alongside my dad, who was a coach predominantly on the female side of the game, but obviously coached me and my sister, who also has had quite a successful career in both netball and basketball. So yeah, we've had a good run in the sport, and now just transitioning out of professional sport, which is a challenge in itself, and looking to help the game in terms of netball and basketball as much as I can. It's a pleasure to be here, and look forward to answering some of your questions.
Good evening, everybody. Keith Bonus. If I reeled off my whole history, it'd take about 2 weeks. Currently, my main role is in coach development, so I'm coach educator for the FA on B licence, C licence, and currently assessing coaches in the national female game, tidying up some of the stuff left. The FA is struggling to get tutors to go around and assess people, and they've kind of brought me on board to tidy up in the southeast, so doing a lot of travelling around at the moment. I'm also back working in the women's game at Step 6 with a club called Welling, which are one division down from Fulham. Lucky for you. But that's all right, next year maybe. What else am I doing? I'm a mentor as well on the BAME and female programme with the FA, and I'm currently head coach voluntarily for the English Colleges women's representative side. We've just come back from a tournament in Italy, and so on and so forth. I've been a coach for over 40 years. I've been a coach educator for over 20 years. Been involved in the women's game for around 30 years. And how did I get started? I went out to the States. That was my first taste of the women's game way back in the 90s. And then I was the first A-licensed coach to work at a female centre of excellence for Charlton Athletic, again back in the 90s. And that was frowned upon. People asked me why would an A-licensed coach want to work in the girls' game. I can give the answers in certain, but I couldn't say what I actually said at the time to them. But yeah, it's been an amazing journey for me. It never ends. And I've coach educated quite a few strong female coaches that have gone on to greater things, but maybe those will come out in further questions, so I won't go on now. Told you, take forever.
Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. I'll start with you, Steve. So you're currently the head coach of Fulham Women's first team, as you've said, and you've previously coached a men's team at AFC Wimbledon. How have you found coaching women in comparison to men? Are there any major similarities and differences? And have you altered your coaching style to cater to those similarities or differences?
Good question. I think regardless of gender, there's always going to be differences in people that we coach anyway. So I think regardless of whether we're coaching men or whether we're coaching women, we have to be adaptable and flexible to work with just a variety of people. I think if we were to generalise a little bit, I think I was talking about this actually very recently with our staff team at Fulham. I think one of the reasons why I'm so keen to stay in the women's game at the moment is because I think women are a little bit more detail orientated and want to know a lot more information about the game. Men and boys typically will go, there's a football, there's a couple of goals, I'm just going to go and play. There's somebody trying to tell me something to do, but I'm not really that interested in that. And I genuinely enjoy, I think, being able to have those sort of higher level, sort of more detailed conversations with people who actually want to know what maybe the coach or the staff team are able to provide. So I think there is a few differences, but generally I think gender aside, I think we always have to be sort of adaptable to the fact that people are people and all people are different.
100%, and I would say with that, bringing new players into the squad, especially in pre-season, what role does a sense of belonging and togetherness play when you're introducing those new players, and do you have any examples of techniques you'd use to integrate them into your culture?
Another good question. I think bringing new players into an environment is always particularly difficult. When togetherness and I think a team bond is something that we all probably strive towards trying to achieve a sort of quite a high level of. Certainly as coaches, I think there's so much research and so many publications out there talking about togetherness, not just from team sports, but also from individual sports with their staff teams, etc. That is certainly something that's always high on our agenda. I think for us at Fulham, what we've tried to implement over the last few years is a consistent sort of approach to how the team feel when they're playing with us. So what experiences that they have when they're with us. So not just from a playing side, but also from sort of off the pitch. And one of the things I think we've probably been really consistent with over the course of the last few years is that we all collectively have always created our values and behaviours. And probably every year we think we've created the best values and behaviours from the group as a collective, and every year when we come around to doing the same task again, and hearing the new experiences from the players that we've just signed, they seem to become even more coherent and even more relatable to the group that's actually playing with us. So I think for us, it's our values and behaviours are the thing that we try and use to create that sense of belonging, that togetherness, and hopefully it's working. Yeah,
that's great to hear that you're kind of using your players' perspectives to encourage your behaviours as coaches. That's really good to hear. If we move on to Dan, having played elite basketball for the likes of Manchester Giants and Great Britain, and you're now stepping into the world of netball, which is a predominantly female sport, have you noticed any big culture differences between the two sports, and what learnings have you brought from basketball that you are bringing into your role at Surrey Storm?
I'll start with moving into netball. As you said, it's a predominantly female sport, but coming from basketball, it's a sport where I think male and more so than any other sport, I think across the world in general. You've got many examples in America and in other mainland countries in Europe that see women's basketball as an equal to male sport and the male version of the sport, which is quite refreshing when you come back and see it in this country where the leagues, it's not the same league, it's divided, it's, you see one level of coverage and things like that that's, coming from a family where, my mum played and dad was heavily involved in the female side of the sport, it's quite concerning and quite worrying, and something that definitely needs to change to move the sport forward, because, women in basketball, women in any sport have a huge role to play moving any sport forward. They're the hugely important part of that, and have a lot of valid points and a lot of areas to touch on that that male people don't often see, which is extremely important. So moving into netball, it's definitely been interesting. The main difference being the level of professionalisation. I think that the service that we're able to provide for netball players, that means that they normally, I'd say on 90% of the 90% of the time, have to have another job on the side of their sport, and coming up through the pathway and seeing these amazing players, that are doctors, that are mothers, that are doing all these amazing things. How good could they be if we provided a platform for them to be full-time professional athletes, which I think they should be in a sport like netball. You've seen the coverage grow over the last few years in terms of the success the England Roses team have had, the Commonwealth Games and situations like that allow the sport to stand alone on its own alongside the likes of football and sports like that that can say that that we're proud of what we're doing, and this is what we should be looked after better, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And touching upon what you said about women's teams having to learn from males teams and they're kind of following their footsteps, do you think there's anything that male teams can learn from the female teams in terms of their creating a sense of togetherness in the game?
Yeah, definitely. I think the learning thing goes both ways, but definitely, Steve touched on it briefly before. The level of detail that female athletes go into sometimes and break things down is admirable and extremely interesting. I'm a bit of a freak when it comes to technical and tactical, ideas behind sports and things like that, and looking into different areas. And there's definitely a lot more thought. I can definitely say that from a basketball point of view, in the women's game and the way it's played tactically, compared to the men. The men's game is seen to be more spectacular, and you see these highlights on the social media and the content pages that are out there. But for the true lovers of the game, it's refreshing to see the women's game.
100%. Thank you so much for that. If we move on to Keith, you spent some time working as national head coach for women and girls at Estonian FA. Did you find there were any cultural differences when working with women somewhere other than England that you as a coach had to adapt to in order to get the best out of your players?
Wow. Again, how long have you got? Definitely different culturally. Estonia is a very, very small country. When I got there was only literally 400 female players, women and girls involved in the whole country, but the population was only about 1.2 million anyway. But yeah, it was frowned upon, and it's also 25% Russian population, and the parents of the Estonians and the Russians weren't keen on their daughters playing football. It was they got to be dancers, singers, lawyers, bankers, anything but football. But even with that daunting prospect, the first experience that I had there when I arrived in January 2009 in minus 10 degrees was seeing two teams walk out on an AstroTurf pitch covered in ice, fully clothed, ready to play an 11-a-side game of football. That I would never have stepped onto the pitch that night. And I was standing there with a cup of coffee glued to my hand, frozen to my hand. The coffee was cold within minutes. So culturally very different, and it was a massive task. It was initially a 3-year contract. It ended up being 8 years. But my task was to run all the national teams, women's and girls, and develop the game. By the time I left, after 8 years, we had over 2,000 females participating in schools, colleges, clubs, forced gently the men's teams to form women's and girls teams. It was part of their licensing process, so they never got a license to run their men's programs or their boys teams unless they got a female team, which resulted in some positives but also some negatives because they didn't take it seriously. But I just went around knocking doors down and kicking people out the backside, and eventually it worked, and we had a lot of success with it. But to cut a long story short, within months of me leaving, the whole program was wrecked because they put not a female coach that I'd mentored for 8 years, was a master's degree holder, had got a pro license with me when I did my pro license, was a fabulous assistant coach, an Estonian female coach. She should have got the job. They gave it to a male international player that just quit playing, never coached female players, gave him the job, wasn't even qualified, and he wrecked the whole program within 6 months. So that was a heartbreaker. And Catherine, my assistant, is now working in the States as a very successful college coach. So she went on to get some success from what was achieved, but it'll always rankle with me that she didn't get the job that she should have got, because that was part of my job.
100%. It's amazing to hear the kind of contribution you had to the growth, and it's such a shame that it kind of fell apart without an ally to support it, basically. Would you say anything that you learned from that experience, have you brought that back to England in the way you coach now?
Well, obviously I spent a long time before going there, working 8 years at Charlton and then Millwall Lionesses, and so I took a lot with me there. What did I bring back? I think patience, humility, understanding of different levels, because I certainly had to my first training session with an under-17 squad, national team squad, which totaled 20 players. That was it. Some of them couldn't even juggle a ball once or twice. That was the national team squad. So I had to almost go back to coaching as if they were under-8s to start with and build from there. So I learned that you can't set your expectations too high. And similarly with my first 2 World Cup qualifiers, we played Iceland and France, and we lost 12-0 and 12-0. And my wife, who, as you know, England goalkeeper, she came out to surprise me, and she was really surprised. So, yeah, against Iceland, within 30 minutes, we were 8-0 down. We'd beaten teams around us in local competition, but that was my first 2 World Cup qualifier experiences. So it was, learning how to take defeat graciously, but how to deal with the emotions and the situation around those players. So I brought that back with me. So now I would say the level I'm working with now, the girls I'm working with now, wouldn't be that far different from my national team there in ability levels and in the mentality. So I can draw on those experiences to work with that level of player rather than when I've worked with the elite performers before.
Definitely, it's great to hear how not only did you help the growth of their playing, but you helped grow yourself as a coach to bring back here, so that's really amazing to hear. If we go back to Steve, at the beginning of this season, Fulham Women introduced a new under-18s team to the club, led by Jodie Williams. Through co-coaching with Jodie, how have you been a male ally to support her to lead and develop that team?
Yeah, another good question. I think again, actually, I'm going to refer back to something I sort of referenced earlier. Hopefully, I've not done anything differently, regardless of whether Jodie is a female coach or a male coach. Hopefully, my support for her and our coaching team for the under-18s is no different to how we operate or how I've operated with any of the teams that we've worked with. What was there another part to that question? Sorry.
Well, also just considering that, how this co-delivery helps improve the game in general, so having kind of both sides of male contribution and female contribution coach-wise to those teams.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think there's a couple of things there. I think there can definitely be some real positives to that. And again, I think I'll refer back to it doesn't necessarily. I don't know if there's an importance of having a male and a female, but having, I think, coaches that are comfortable working with each other and have a very similar vision of how they want to grow and develop their players, I think is really vital for us. Obviously, we've got a number of common goals, but one of them is to try and progress players from our under-18s program into our first team program, and so we need to be able to prepare the players for that. But I think if we were to talk about the sort of the gender split, I think maybe to a lot of an extent, I probably would have had a lot of different experiences maybe as a player when I was younger, because as we know and we've talked about already in this room, playing opportunities for boys certainly when I was younger were probably a lot more available to me, and I was probably afforded a lot more opportunities than Jodie was. Jodie and I actually grew up in the same town. Didn't know particularly well. There's a couple of years between us, but I knew the landscape of women's football and girls' football at the time, and it wasn't particularly great. I went on to coach a girls' team, as I referenced earlier, and so got a sort of first-hand experience of what that was like then. So I think maybe the combination of our experiences from playing perspectives actually can really help the players, because I probably, although I've had first-hand experience of it from a coaching perspective, I definitely wouldn't have had experience from a playing perspective of what it's like not to have opportunity. And so I guess that's something that Jodie can really bring to our group, and I think that's important to share.
Definitely, it's great to hear how you're kind of highlighting those different experiences, and it's not always necessarily a gender split, as you say. You don't really see gender as a barrier. Everybody's equal, and just having those different experiences because we're different people rather than having that divide all the time. So that's really good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that we're really proud of, I think, at the club is that we've got, we have what we believe to be the best people in the positions that we've got across our staff team. Now, if we were to analyse the differences in genders in our staff team, I think there's just myself and our goalkeeper coach who are male. And every other staff member, so our physical development coach, physio, analyst, say the word properly, analyst, and then our whole under 18 staff team are all female coaches or staff members. So I think that's important regardless of the gender split. It's about having the right people in the roles for the people that you're working with.
100%. Thank you so much. So Dan, as ex-captain of Great Britain, you've had plenty of experience leading and bonding teammates, and therefore understand the importance of that in the success of any team. Have any of your previous coaches introduced any interesting techniques to develop that togetherness within your team?
I mean, it's a good question and an extremely important area of sport, I think, in general, across the board. In terms of how people come together, how teams come together, how different individuals work together on the court, off the court. And I think it's extremely important to realise that, I think especially in professional sport, your relationships away from the pitch or the court or your area of play are almost as important as what they are on the court. And a lot of the things that happen away from the pitch or the court, you can see them come through on game day or on match day or whenever your competition may be. Working for a long time and playing with the national team for a long time, and it's a bit of a different atmosphere because you're together for a short period of time, but you almost develop that type of family environment, I would say, where you're living together in a hotel for 3-4 weeks on end, that that allows you to develop those bonds in a very special way. Whether it be late night card games or going to the cinema together and things like that, things that you wouldn't normally do with your day-to-day teammate, but those moments with national teams especially, I think are special. And and the best coaches that we've had at national teams have really encouraged those moments and allowed us given us the platform and in terms of free time and moments to cherish each other's time together. And some of the best friends that I've made through sport have come from the national team, and and it's extremely important to move forward in life with those friends, I think.
100%. It's great to hear how you have that perspective as a player that those will be your friends for life. And how do you use that experience as a player to then integrate into your coaching career in terms of providing space for your players to become friends and have those friendships forever?
I touched on it briefly before in terms of talking about professionalising, especially the netball and sport of netball, making that a more professional sport, because it will allow the athletes to have that spare time. At the moment, if we've got athletes coming straight off a 12-hour shift at A&E straight to training and things like that, how are they going to have time to to develop that that special bond or that special feel, and I think that's one of the key areas that it will help the sport from a performance point of view, but also help the sport commercially and across the board in terms of growing it and getting it in people's eyes, getting it on TV, getting it in in the media and things like that. Having access to the athletes more and allowing the athletes to have access to each other more will definitely grow the game moving forward.
100% agree. Giving them that space to be seen and promote them, and then that will kind of give them that free time to develop themselves as a team off the pitch or off the court to essentially benefit their play at the end of the day. Thank you very much. If we move on to Keith. There are a lot of major injuries in the female game at the moment at all levels. And as a coach educator, how would you say, do you think there's more that needs to be done in terms of the differences between the male and female game, especially when it comes to injury, and kind of different activities that are, you know, safe in terms of warming up or stuff like that?
You're obviously talking predominantly about ACL injuries, which is the most common in the female game. And I had a player at Charlton Eartha Pond who had 3 during her career, and I firmly believe she's probably the best left back that never played for England, and potentially the injuries are one of the reasons. So again, in Estonia, while I was in Estonia, FIFA introduced something called the 11+. I don't know if you're aware of that. If anybody in the room isn't, it's available online through FIFA. And that's a set of designated exercises that are supposed to help prevent ACLs in particular. I don't know if there's yet any statistical proof that it's worked, but I think there's this danger. I think you can talk about boys, girls, women's, men's game. I think certainly during the development years, and I don't know if the guys sitting next to me would agree, that I'd always recommend my players, no matter what gender, don't just do football. Do basketball, do netball, go and have a game of tennis, go and swim, go and do other sports. And I still think there's danger of people get focused, and parents in particular get focused on, she's going to be this player for the Lionesses, so she's going to do football. And that one focus could lead to some of those injuries, because the body isn't using enough different parts, if you like, unless you've got a really experienced S&C coach. And again, it's about education. So S&C coaches, again, you still see people, and again, this is no disrespect, you'll see grassroots coaches putting the hurdles and ladders out and doing plyometric exercise. They haven't really got a clue what they're doing. They've just seen it on the telly, and they bought the equipment and it looks good. Oh yeah, go and jump over that, and they don't focus on the technical aspects of that. There's a technique to everything you do. Putting a player in the gym, go and do some gym exercises, but they're doing squats the wrong way, they're doing movements the wrong way. So it's about education and expertise. So maybe more specific courses in relation to that. We do first aid courses, we do safeguarding, we do courses teaching coaches. You know, is there enough of that teaching coaches how to do the correct? I know SAQ used to run separate courses years ago, because I did them, how to use their equipment. So it's not just a case of go and buy the equipment and stick it on the grass and jump over them 50 times. It's people have to know what the technical aspects are to those exercises. So the key word is education.
Definitely. And how would you say, in terms of mentioning those other different sports, how can you incorporate that in a football session to kind of give that differentiation between, you know, maybe playing a game at the end of the session versus a warm-up, maybe handball or something different?
100% recommend handball games. And I did a session for the Surrey coaches not too long ago. I'm also president of Surrey Coaches Association, and I did a demonstration session when we had the presentation with Hope Powell and Kopi. And it's a game that I adapted from a game called Switch by a coach from QPR, and it incorporates netball, basketball and football. So on a command or on a whistle, when it's safe, we switch disciplines within the game. So they revert from a netball to using the basketball to football. So again, using your imagination, relate things to what's relevant to the kids, and stick little fun games in there that's not just about football. And again, the simple cliches of different size footballs, even using a rugby ball, for instance, or a basketball. Stick them into your training sessions, if not as a relevant part, as part of the warm-up or part of the last part of the day, or on a different day. If you're a luxury and you're training more often than not, I'd always set aside one day in Estonia on a national team camp where it was just a day of fun games. So when you've got the facility or the wherewithal to be able to do that, do it. Don't be scared to experiment, and don't be scared to use your imagination, but be careful what you're doing it with. So don't do heading with a futsal ball, which is one of the things I saw when I was in Estonia.
Definitely. I think it's so important to have that differentiation, not just for injury prevention, but also kind of the social aspect and different physical ability. So yeah, thank you very much. How are we doing for time? Wrap it up? Yeah, so we'll wrap it up there then. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to hear your perspective as male allies in sport. Thank you.